Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. Picture this. It's the spring of 1946, and we're looking inside a pretty bleak Bavarian prison cell. There's a heavy-set 53-year-old guy with small, dark eyes sitting at a wooden table. Now, he's just been told he's being charged with an absolutely horrific war crime, the murder of unarmed American prisoners of war near a little Belgian crossroads called Malmedy. But you know what? Instead of denying it, he just leans back and drops a totally shocking secret on his American interrogators. And it wasn't a secret about the crime itself, but about the legendary Battle of the Bulge, which he had literally just commanded.
Just look at this incredible admission. This man, Josef Sepp Dietrich, the commander of the 6th Panzer Army, which was the massive spearhead of Germany's final Western offensive, just casually confesses that the entire operation was doomed from the start. He told his interrogators that he knew it. He told Adolf Hitler in private. He told his chief of staff. And honestly, the most stunning part? Every single veteran German commander involved knew this attack was mathematically and tactically impossible before a single shot was ever fired. So why on earth did they march anyway?
Section 1, Hitler's Impossible Dream. To really wrap our heads around why these generals marched right into a meat grinder, we've got to look at the sheer delusion driving the whole strategy. So, rewind to September 1944. Deep inside the Wolf's Lair, which was this massive complex of concrete bunkers buried in the pine forests of East Prussia, a physically trembling Adolf Hitler demands a massive surprise counterattack through the Ardennes to capture Antwerp. But consider this stark contrast. Sure, Germany had successfully pushed through the Ardennes back in May of 1940, but back then they had a prime officer corps and total control of the skies. The Germany of 1944? It was a shattered shell of its former self. By 44, their synthetic fuel plants were getting bombed flat by the Allies, and the Luftwaffe, well, it was virtually non-existent. They had absolutely zero control of the air over the battlefield. And the arithmetic of their desperation, it's just staggering. By this point, the Wehrmacht had already taken something like 3.5 million casualties on the Eastern Front alone. That elite officer corps that pulled off those lightning-fast campaigns early in the war, completely ground down. So what Hitler was proposing was to take the absolute last scraps of Germany's strategic reserves and hurl an army made up largely of teenagers and factory workers in their 40s against the combined might of the Western Allies. But the really crucial point here is the sheer physical reality of what he was asking. Hitler expected this heavily depleted, poorly trained, and completely underfueled force to push 125 miles. And we're not talking about a stroll across an open plain. We're talking about incredibly rugged, narrow, heavily forested terrain in the dead of winter. Honestly, it was a complete operational fantasy. Which brings us to Section 2, the rejected alternative. As you might guess, the veteran commanders tasked with actually pulling off this so-called miracle immediately saw the writing on the wall. Take Field Marshal Walter Model, for instance. He was famously known as the Führer's fireman because he had this uncanny ability to stabilize completely disastrous, hopeless situations. Well, he delivered this blunt, unvarnished professional assessment to his staff. I mean, think about it. When the guy you call to put out your worst fires tells you the house is already burnt to the ground, you should probably listen. So Rundstedt and Model did something pretty extraordinary for the time. They actually pushed back. They drafted an alternative plan they called the Small Solution, codenamed Autumn Mist. Just comparing the two approaches is wild. Instead of trying to miraculously reach Antwerp, their plan aimed to just stop east of the Meuse River and create a tactical encirclement of American forces. It was modest, it was actually achievable, and most importantly, it accepted Germany's severe limitations when it came to fuel, air cover, and trained men. But Hitler, he absolutely refused to listen. He didn't want a tactical victory. He needed a strategic miracle. So he literally took the original impossible plan, wrote these exact words on it, "Nicht abändern," which translates to not to be altered, and stamped it. He demanded they execute his vision. And stuck in that old Prussian tradition of blind obedience, instead of resigning, these brilliant generals simply saluted, went back to their headquarters, and started preparing for an operation they deeply, deeply opposed. That leads into Section 3, the reluctant spearhead, because the heaviest burden of this impossible offensive fell squarely onto the shoulders of one man. That man was Sepp Dietrich. Now, he wasn't exactly some formally trained military mastermind. He was actually a former butcher's apprentice, a farm laborer, and famously one of Adolf Hitler's early chauffeurs and bodyguards. But he was incredibly pragmatic.
He'd spent years watching ideological attacks completely fail against well-prepared defenses. So when he saw this plan, he accurately predicted exactly why his tanks were going to fail. He pointed out some brutal realities: waist-deep snow, narrow, single-track forest roads that ran through deep stream cuts. He wouldn't even have room to deploy his tanks properly. And cruelly, they'd only have about 8 hours of daylight each day to actually fight in. This utter lack of faith in the plan echoed right down the chain of command. SS Lieutenant General Hermann Priest perfectly captured the fatal fuel arithmetic with this comment. The lead battle group hadn't even started their engines yet, and their commanders were joking, very darkly I might add, that getting just a single tank halfway to the objective would be a massive success. They knew, right then and there, the gas simply wasn't there.
Which brings us to Section 4, the predicted failure. Just days before the attack, Hitler stripped his senior commanders of their weapons and lectured them for 2 agonizing hours in a disguised bunker complex called Adlerhorst. They left with dry mouths and sinking feelings. And when the offensive finally launched on December 16th, it unraveled exactly as they feared. Notice how rapidly it deteriorates. The opening barrage quickly gives way to clogged roads. By the 17th, lead elements like Kampfgruppe Piper are literally hijacking American fuel just to keep moving and committing the horrific Malmedy massacre in the process. Then the fatal blow lands on December 23rd, when the overcast winter weather finally clears. Allied P-47s swarmed the sky, turning stalled German columns into an absolute shooting gallery. By Christmas Eve, Piper's elite spearhead had blown up their own out-of-gas tanks and were trudging back eastward through the snow on foot. Even as this failure became completely undeniable, General Montefel, who was commanding the southern flank, begged High Command to halt the offensive and pull back, but he was completely overruled. The entire German command was plunged into what Montefel later hauntingly described as a state of grim mechanical continuation. They knew it was over, but the machine just kept blindly marching forward into the meat grinder anyway. Section 5. The Fatal Cost. By early January, the predictable collapse was complete, and Hitler's desperate gamble had consumed the absolute last, precious reserves of the Third Reich. The human toll of this blind obedience was just catastrophic. Look at these numbers. Roughly 100,000 German soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured in an operation their own commanders didn't even believe in. And the cost to stop them was immense too. 19,000 American soldiers lost their lives in the freezing snows of the Ardennes, fighting off a mission that had been mathematically disproven in the planning room months prior. And the strategic fallout? Well, it was exactly what you'd expect. Because Hitler stubbornly burned his final panzer divisions in the snows of Belgium in December, the Eastern Front was left completely stripped. So when the Soviets launched their massive offensive on January 12th, the German lines just instantly shattered. The Soviet army easily advanced 300 miles right up to the Oder River, establishing bridgeheads less than 70 miles from Berlin. Basically, Hitler bet the house on a Western punch, missed entirely, and left the back door wide open. Later, post-war U.S. Army interrogations revealed the tragic and bitter ends of the men who had accurately foreseen this exact disaster. Field Marshal von Rundstedt lived out his days broken and cynical, claiming he was nothing more than a postman, just delivering orders he couldn't change. Field Marshal Model, the guy who knew the plan didn't have a leg to stand on, walked into the woods in April 1945 and took his own life rather than surrender. And Sepp Dietrich, our reluctant spearhead, he served 10 years in prison for the war crimes his men committed during that desperate, doomed advance. So I want to leave you with this haunting historical question to chew on. Beyond the tactics, beyond the fuel arithmetic, and the specific battles in the snow, what is the ultimate moral duty of a leader when handed a mission they know, with absolute certainty, will only result in meaningless slaughter? If professional judgment is completely silenced by blind obedience, what exactly is leadership even for? It's a really heavy question, but it's one that this tragic chapter of history absolutely demands we ask. Thanks for diving into this explainer with me, and keep questioning the history behind the history.